everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on the Dark Matter Digital Network. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster and producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is Brien Foerster. And Brien was born in Rochester, Minnesota, USA, but grew up on the west coast of Canada. At age 11, he became fascinated with the art of the Haida and other native people, and began carving totem poles and other related art forms, learning from native teachers. After completing an Honours Bachelor of Science degree, Brien decided to take up carving and sculpture for full-time at the age of 25. This included the creation of 15 full-size totem poles, dugout canoes, masts, bowls, boxes, and other native-style works. In 1995, he moved to Maui, Hawaii, and was hired as assistant project manager for the building of the 62-foot double-hull sailing canoe, ancestor of the modern-day catamaran, and it's Mokia o Pilani. I might have screwed that up, but we'll see. A sacred lizard that pierces the heavens. This project lasted 2 years, and over the course of the next decade, he explored Polynesia, looking for the source of the Polynesian people. Peru became his next major area of interest. The study of the Inca culture led to his writing his first book, A Brief History of the Incas. As of April 2015, he has written a total of 16 books, all available in e-format and paperback from via his www.hiddenincatours.com website, as well as www.barnesandnobles.com and www.amazon.com. All of these books are about ancient mysteries. He also writes articles for Graham Hancock, www.grahamhancock.com, and was associated with Lord Pye of the Star Child Project, whose geneticist is analyzing the DNA of the elongated human skulls of the Peruvian paracas culture on his behalf. He counts amongst his colleagues Stephen Mailer, author, archaeologist, ancient Egypt oral tradition specialist, and expert on crystal skulls; Christopher Dunn, engineer and author of the Giza Power Plant; Dr. Robert Schock, geologist and expert of ancient Egypt; Hugh Newman of Megalithomania, who he co-sponsors tours with L.A. Marzulli, and many other well-known alternative authors and researchers. Brien has been on 10 episodes of Ancient Aliens, numerous radio shows, including Red Ice Creations, Coast to Coast AM, Jeff Rentz, Project Camelot, and a new U.S. video series called Unsealed, as well as L.A. Marzulli's The Watchers, episodes 6 and 8. He has become an authority on the megalithic works of South America and the perplexing ancient elongated-headed people of the area, and divides his time between Paracas, Peru, and Cusco. And another website, www.chematology.com. And please welcome Brien to the show this evening. Hi, Brien.
Hi, Solaris. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you tonight?
Good, thanks.
Great. Thanks for joining us this evening. It's great to have you on all the way over.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, from Peru. So right now, so tell us what you've been up to.
Oh, gee. My life is very busy, but honestly, we just returned from the high jungle of Peru, an area of Tarapoto, and there we were with the royal family of the nation of Bahrain, experiencing ancient medicinal practices and exploring the area for about 10 days.
Oh, nice. That sounds lovely. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I do want to get into some of the other areas you've investigated throughout your years. What kinds of ancient technological devices have you encountered over the years in your research? This is something that really stirs my interest insofar as anything that really sparks your interest for maybe an off-world technology that cues you that some of these devices were built by something other than mankind.
Well, the two most probable areas of that are Egypt and Peru and Bolivia. And there we see stone cutting technology far more advanced than either the pharaonic Egyptian or dynastic Egyptian people or the Incas or other cultures of Peru. We're actually looking at levels of technology beyond what we have in the 21st century. And so it's a question of exposing this to the world and showing people that even though the megalithic works of both Egypt and Peru and Bolivia are believed to have been done by local people, they're clearly much older and were done by other civilizations other than those proposed.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Yeah, that really sparks my interest. And we'll get into Egypt later on, but I did want to start off with some of the elongated skulls that you've investigated. And, a lot of people are on the fence insofar as if it comes from regular, quote-unquote, ancestors of ours, or if it comes from an off-world species. And what is your impression of this, and can you elaborate on some of the testing that's been done on these skulls?
Well, the most interesting thing, and actually that was the subject of my latest book, is that elongated skulls have been found on every occupied continent. Every continent except Antarctica has evidence of people with elongated skulls or heads, and most commonly about 2,000 years ago. But the most intriguing ones, I believe, are those in Peru and Bolivia, but most specifically where I am right now, which is Paracas, and that's where the largest elongated skulls in the world exist. That culture, the Paracas, died out about 2,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And do you see a correlation between these and the giants?
Well, there are some legends about giants in Peru, but not as much as there are in in North America. Of course, some people will have heard of the Lovelock Cave giants and many other giants that have been whose skeletons have been excavated, especially in the 19th century. And one correlation is that both the Paracas people of the coast of Peru and also many of the giants found in North America had very dark red hair, which is not typical of Native Americans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Right. So what do you think happened to some of these races? I mean, where do you think they went?
Well, it seems that the giants of North America, of which I don't know that much, but some of my colleagues, such as Hugh Newman and also Ellie Marzulli, have done extensive work. It seems that they were exterminated by Native American people. It's quite possible that these giant people, and we're talking probably 7 feet or possibly even 8 feet in size, could very well have predated many of the Native American groups, or they arrived in North America from other parts of the world and came into conflict with the local Native people and were exterminated.
Mm-hmm. Right. That certainly makes sense. Would you say that the elongated skulls had a higher intellect?
It's quite possible. We don't know exactly because the Paracas people, for example, it seems now that they were exterminated by another local people who are actually much more famous, and those are the Nazca people. So we do have evidence that the elongated skull Paracas people disappeared about 2,000 years ago, and it's likely that it was the Nazca moving into the area that resulted in the extermination of these people who were not technologically advanced, but they were very advanced in terms of some metal work, also textiles, pottery, and other cultural attributes.
Mm-hmm. What do you think created the conflict? Was it just territories?
Yeah, actually, I've done a lot of work on that. And about 2,200 years ago, there was localized climate change. Where the Nazca people came from, which was to the north, their area became desertified. And so they found a very difficult time trying to grow food, and it was easy for them to invade the south into where the Paracas lived. The Paracas were masters of agriculture. They were able to tap into the ground to tap into underground streams and other water systems. So I think it was simply a problem of resources. The Nazca were far more warlike, and so they, I believe, into the area and exterminated the elongated skull royal class of Paracas people.
That's really fascinating. And how many skulls are there in association with the elongated skulls across the board, would you say?
Well, in the Paracas area alone, there several hundred have been found, if not thousands. There are elongated Paracas skulls in most major museum collections around the world. Most of those were collected probably prior to 1950. Recently, the Peruvian government has made it completely illegal for the export of any pre-Columbian artifacts, and especially human artifacts. And so the major museums, such as many in the United States and Europe, would have collected these skulls in the early part of the 20th century.
That's really interesting. So obviously they found the entire body, the entire skeleton, correct?
Yes, actually, there are 300 royal Paracas mummies, which are the central museum in Lima, Peru. They're completely wrapped in very elaborate textiles and buried in a fetal position. But in general, the ones that have been accessed by foreign museums, it's mainly the skulls that were of most interest to them. So they were removed from the skeleton and exported.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and how high would you, or how tall would you say they were? Just average height, or?
No, actually, we found evidence that the average Peruvian people of today are probably 5'4", 5'5", something like that. But we found evidence by measuring some of the ancient femurs that some of the paracas could have been 6 feet tall.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And I know there's been talk about a correlation between Nephilim and the elongated skulls, but do you see any connection there or no?
It is possible. People, when they see these skulls, automatically label them as being alien or Anunnaki or Nephilim. But Eli Marzulli has done extensive work on the Nephilim, and the timeline of their appearance and disappearance seems to some degree to coincide with the arrival of the paracas on the coast of Peru. So what we're hoping to do is DNA testing of these skulls so that we're able to see if there are any genotypes or ancestry that doesn't relate to the common thought, which is that all native people of the Americas cross the Bering Land Bridge.
Okay, well, that's interesting there. Another question that comes to mind is, have they ever did any measurement for like an EMF or a radio frequency signal off of the skulls themselves? Any type of signature?
Not that I know of. The problem is that in Peru and Bolivia, where there are profound numbers of these ancient skulls and skeletons, there are no radiocarbon labs, no ancient DNA testing labs. And so any major studies of these people would require experts to come in from either the United States, Canada, or Europe, maybe Australia, in order to be able to conduct advanced testing of such as you are suggesting.
Right. It seems to me like if it were me, I would be interested in doing something like that because, according to ancient mystery schools, the skulls were symbolic of a transfer of consciousness from one being to the next. I mean, if you want to go into the mystical aspect of it, and I would think that maybe they were using it as a way to connect with their ancestors. And I'm always looking at signatures and frequencies in association with not just the object itself. So I was just curious about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Has anybody ever meditated with these skulls or anything like that?
Yeah, I have actually.
Yeah. What did you get from it?
I get initial impressions, which then I look for actual evidence of. And my initial impression, again, was that the paracas were victims of genocide or extermination. And so through doing studies of the Nazca people, their origins, etc., it's becoming reasonably clear that the Nazca, in fact, did invade. The elongated skulls were only the upper class people, the religious class, and also the royal family exclusively had elongated skulls. The general population just looked like normal people, but the ruling class of people all had elongated skulls, and I think they were the ones targeted by the Nazca for extermination. By taking them out, then it would have been easy to take over, like many societies do, and then dominate the bulk of the population that remained.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense right there. So with all your travels, I mean, you've been to some powerful places, energetically speaking. I can only imagine that you pick up on a psychic level or on a level of higher consciousness, some kind of an imprint besides that. Do you really activate on a higher level of consciousness when you travel? Does it seem like you go into maybe in between the spaces of a different kind of timeline in the illusion of?
Well, definitely. I was born with psychic ability. Whether it's a blessing or a curse, it kind of depends on the day. But definitely, that's what drew me as a kid to ancient mysteries, UFOs, science fiction, etc. And I've just been blessed to be able, especially in the last 10 or so years, to be able to travel to many amazing ancient sites and look for evidence of who exactly did some of this work that, again, the presumed cultures physically and technologically simply couldn't or could not have achieved.
Right. Yeah, it's like revisiting our true celestial ancestry or something along that line, isn't it?
Well, it is. And the fact is that many academics and scholars have presumed what the history of these places are without having any scientific evidence. And so that's what my job is. Having a scientific background is to bring in experts such as geologists, engineers, chemists, etc. Look at the actual materials, the cut surfaces of the stone, etc., and try to figure out how this was done, because it was not done by ancestral people with bronze tools, which is the presumption. Any engineer will simply laugh at the idea that a site like Tiwanaku in Bolivia or that the Great Pyramids in Egypt were created by the presumed people of that day, utilizing a bunch of slaves and ropes and dragging these things around. It's again, we're looking at beyond. In some cases, we're looking at beyond 21st century technology existing in the distant past.
Absolutely. I agree. And that brings me to ask you, why do you think they were built? I mean, was it for initiations? Were they trying to activate a stargate? Did they want to go home? I mean, there's so many different levels to why they designed these specific sites. And I'm curious to think of what your impression is.
Well, the one commonality between some of the work in Egypt, again, such as the Great Pyramid, a site called the Serapeum, which is an underground tunnel system with 100-ton boxes that could not have been achieved in the 21st century so far, and the stonework in and around Cusco, Peru, where there is no mortar or cement. It's stone-on-stone contact, where you can't fit a human hair in between in the joints, is that I think these ancient people were working with vibration, not only vibrational technology in terms of the construction, but also the buildings themselves were meant to vibrate with specific frequencies, possibly for requirements of higher, to match the higher abilities mentally that these people naturally had.
Yeah, I tend to believe you on that one. It reminds me of kind of an Atlantean theme insofar as a higher consciousness and almost an iridescent design behind it. And when I say iridescent, I'm thinking of the matrix itself. According to ancient belief systems, there's a lot of information based on the transfiguration at the cellular atomic level where they actually activate the DNA through frequencies. And I know you being so close to the pyramids and the Great Pyramids and being in those areas, did you ever feel that frequency of the transfiguration where your body was becoming more light body oriented to a higher level of consciousness?
Well, you definitely go into an alternate state of consciousness. Often it's quite subtle, but that is definitely the case. For example, in the Great Pyramid, I've been in the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the Subterranean Chamber several times now, and you naturally quite rapidly move into at least a slightly alternate state of consciousness, especially in the King's Chamber. And then the experts that we bring with us, such as U.S.A, who lives across the street from the Sphinx and is one of the world experts on the megalithic places of Egypt, he will tone, and when he hits a specific frequency with his voice, the whole chamber amplifies. So you can tell that chamber was designed to vibrate at that specific frequency.
I've seen that video on YouTube. It's fascinating. And of course, you have an awesome YouTube channel there. That's brienfoerster.com, right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's incredible. I could watch it for hours. You guys have done phenomenal work. Unbelievable. It's just awesome. So, yeah, I encourage everybody to take a good look on that one and subscribe. It's just amazing for sure. And you also touched base with the historical cataclysmic events that damaged the entire planet. And this is what you've quoted, 11,700 years ago. And apparently causing some sea levels to rise about 300 feet. So can you elaborate on this? What was the cause? What do you suspect was the cause of that?
Well, there is mounting scientific evidence from geologists and other experts that there was a major event that happened between 11,700 and 11,900 years ago. It wasn't a one-day event. It took course over possibly hundreds of years. And there are, I think, 4 different major theories about it. One is by Dr. Paul de la Violette, who's an American physicist. He believes that our galactic center is not a black hole, but is in fact a pulsar. And so every 11 to 13,000 years, it emits energy, which then moves across the galactic plane. And that energy, some of it quite lethal, could have done major things such as destroy at least one planet in our solar system, and then go straight through the sun and cause plasma ejection to strike the Earth, heating the atmosphere very rapidly. Another theory is by Allen and Dallaire, who believe that a comet at the same time either hit the Earth or came very close to, and again caused great destabilization. Another theory is by Dr. Robert Schoch that, again, it was plasma ejection from the sun that caused this. And Barbara Han Clow has written, based on not only science but also her Cherokee ancestry, that again this major event happened at that time. So they all agree on the time frame. And what it could have caused is making our planet go from being vertical to its present 23.5 degrees. Also, we know that the sea levels of the oceans rose by 300 feet almost instantaneously. It's what caused the end of our last ice age, which didn't happen over the course of a long period of time, but could have taken a matter of weeks. And so that cataclysmic event would have wreaked havoc on every part of the planet, would have sunken possible coastal civilizations, and it could have terminated what we call Atlantis, because according to Plato, the end of Atlantis was approximately 11,600 or so years ago.
That's really interesting. Now, there's also talk about the moon arriving at that time, and the illusion of that there was record of the moon not existing in our orbit until a certain, I want to say about the timeline you're talking about. Is that correct or no?
That is possible. There are many theories about that, but we do know, for example, that the planet Uranus is rotating on its side, which it shouldn't do if the solar system was created in an organized manner. We also, of course, have the belt of asteroids, which could have been a planet at one time. So as the science comes in, we definitely had this huge cataclysmic event, which went down into folklore and oral tradition as being, for example, the Great Flood, the fall of Atlantis, et cetera, et cetera.
And does that mean that the ancient pyramids were underwater to some degree?
Not the ones in Giza, I don't believe, because, again, the sea level rose by 300 feet. But what we're starting to find out is that the present-day Nile is not in its original position. It was originally, I believe, to the west and was much larger than it is now. Some people call it the Ur-Nil or Near, and it was a much larger river system that, because of this cataclysmic event, moved to the right and is now much smaller than it was to begin with.
Right. And of course, there's so much talk about ancient mystery schools in association with the Ancient Hall of Records and in association with the Sphinx. And being as sensitive as you are, did you ever pick up on a more of an etheric level of this database of knowledge that was there and still probably is on a different frequency?
I believe so, but I don't think we're going to find what is called the Hall of Records in terms of finding gold tablets or books or whatever. Whoever created these ancient constructions in Egypt and also in Peru and Bolivia had mentality and intellect way beyond ours, and I don't think they needed anything written down. They wouldn't have to use that. They would have psychic abilities and the ability to record information and maintain it on a much higher and deeper level than we do. So it's thought by some that, for example, the construction of the Great Pyramid was not something where there were blueprints. Whoever decided to design it and told those using lost ancient technology to build it simply said, build the pyramid, and they would visually be able to see what they were supposed to do and how to achieve it.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like manifesting reality through higher consciousness.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And also the possibility of manipulation of matter.
Right, and matter is energy, so that would make perfect sense. Yeah,
exactly.
And depending on the frequency, of course, that they're manipulating. Wow, that's just incredible. Yeah, and of course, it boils down to sound, like you were talking about. Everything is a toning and a sound and a frequency. Now, have you been able to isolate which frequencies are associated with the pyramids?
It varies depending on the chamber, but 432 hertz seems to be very important, which I believe is either A flat or it's in the A range area, and it is supposedly also the natural vibration of our planet. So it seems that the Great Pyramid system, of which there are not simply the pyramids, but also the tunnels underneath, were harmonizing with the Earth's energy itself, and the pyramids themselves seem to be amplifiers. That's why they're exposed on the surface, whereas the Great Tunnel System, which is probably even more important is several layers underneath the Giza Plateau.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense right there. Yeah, they certainly do amplify. Have you noticed a difference in the frequency? It seems to me like there's a lot going on the planet right now in the illusion of time and energy and space and the continuum. Have you noticed that the pyramids' frequency has altered, maybe lower, or is it more disrupted? Do you see the pyramids have, insofar as having some damage done to them on a frequency level, or no?
Not on a frequency level. I think it's simply that there still is energy seemingly operating inside the pyramids, but it's probably at 1/10,000% of the original. I believe the reason why people like to meditate in places like the Great Pyramid, as well as places in Peru, Bolivia, and other ancient sacred sites, is that they were at one time very much tuned to specific frequencies. And so the residual energy and frequency is still there, but on a much reduced level. But they make excellent places for at least going out of or into slightly altered states of consciousness presently.
I can only imagine. And of course, do they still allow people to meditate in tone in there? I've heard two different stories that yes, they can do it, and sometimes they can't. What's going on over there?
Well, technically, you're not supposed to, but it really depends on who you have guiding you. We're very fortunate that we have the Kemet School, and they're very well known in the area, and so they're allowed to do certain subtle things that other groups are not allowed to do.
Right. I can imagine if you really ramp it up, there would be some interesting activity to some degree. I'm almost wondering if it would open up some kind of a gateway, and not only internally, but also on an exterior level.
Well, according to the theory, the way that the Giza pyramids functioned, again, is that there are these series of tunnels under the Giza plateau. I've been into level 3, but they seem to keep going on. And they were original carriers of water from the original Nile. And so it was the water traveling through these tunnels, which are very specific in terms of dimension, that set up the frequency underneath the Giza plateau. And that allowed the chambers of the pyramids themselves to then have this vibration, which would have been quite profound. We're looking at the possibility of an ancient, almost Wi-Fi kind of system that was in operation, possibly to set up a force field of the area, so that whoever these people, and I would say beings, were that did the original work, they set up conditions that were more conducive to harmonizing with their bodies than ourselves. I mean, I think we're very much a reduced version of who these original people were.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you. Well, I think now we're so bombarded by different dirty electricity and things like that it's kind of polluting the electromagnetic field and aura. But what's interesting to me is like the way water seems to be extremely significant. So was that the source of power at the Great Pyramids, would you say? Was that really the main energy behind what they were capable of?
I believe so. And I use the word power as much as I would energy, and more on a level of vibration for alternate states of consciousness, rather than, some theories are that they were electrical generators. But I think whoever these ancient beings were, they were far beyond us. And so when we try to grasp at forms of technology that we have that would be relevant, it just doesn't work. It's like the common misbelief that that ancient people had lasers in order to cut stone. And Christopher Dunn, author of the Giza Power Plant, was clearly showed on one episode of Ancient Aliens that all lasers do is melt stone. They can't coherently cut flat surfaces. So we're looking at a different kind of vibration. Laser, of course, is coherent light, but it could have been coherent sound, or a level of vibrational technology, again, that would be basically science fiction to us.
Right, exactly. Well, and of course, water being programmable, as we all know, and that it contains consciousness, would tell me that during their ceremonies or whatever they were doing, obviously was raising the frequency or changing the dynamic of the water itself. So who knows what kind of effect it was having, not only from the people or towards the people with their DNA activation. I suspect that it was really powerful if they were using the water in that way.
I agree.
Yeah. must have been incredible. And it also makes me wonder because now it seems like our water supplies, I can only speak here in the U.S., but it seems like there's a lot of contamination with water these days, globally speaking. And I wonder about the water back then and how pure it was in energy and consciousness opposed to today where we have fracking and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, that's true, and it seems definitely if you study cultures like the Inca, water was the most vital thing to them, mainly because of agriculture. But it is possible that they were also involved in activating the energy or enhancing the energy of the water through different rituals such as singing, meditation, etc.
Exactly, getting cosmic downloads, cosmic cocktails. That sounds like fun. Yeah. Is there any record of ancient extraterrestrial species of any kind, off-world species, which correlates with the cataclysmic events? Has there been anything left behind that would signify that in a script of some kind?
Not that I know of. In general, when you're going beyond the time frame of where we think writing began, I think if you go far enough back, you're into cultures that used oral tradition, not because they didn't know how to write things down. It's just it was very important that things be recorded mentally and then were then expressed verbally. So I think I think some of these ancient cultures, including the Inca, perhaps, even though they did have written forms of hieroglyphic language, they used their sense of memory much more than we do today. I mean, we're becoming so dependent upon technology to remember everything that we're supposed to remember that we're actually, I think, weakening our mental capabilities with this somewhat dangerous dependence on even this little tablet I'm holding in my hands right now.
Right. No, I agree with you. Yeah. Well, back then it seemed like they were more storytelling. And of course, we do have cellular memory, which I'm a firm believer in, insofar as, if we dive deep enough in our own cells and atoms, we can actually obtain the information. It's there, probably from our ancestors to some degree. But I also believe that information is activated through frequency. That's just my own take on it. And from what you're telling me about some of the pyramids, it sounds like maybe they were doing the same thing.
Yeah, the one thing you can definitely throw out the window is that major pyramids in Egypt that were built with such incredible precision were not done originally to house the body of some dead ruler. Clearly, the dynastic Egyptians built pyramids, but they were far inferior to the ones that I believe they discovered when they entered the area of Egypt about 5,500 years ago. But the ancient pyramids were built with such sophistication that there had to be a much more important function to them and longevity to them than some monument to some dead ruler.
I agree. And of course, there's always an overlay. It seems to me like whenever something's left behind from an original species, then someone comes in and starts doing their own version and kind of masking it with their energy and taking credit, I guess, to some degree of the construction. And I'm sure that's happened many times over.
Oh, very much so, in many different cultures in many parts of the world.
Right. It's kind of frustrating at the same time, because you want to dive deep into these areas and really see who was the originator of this stuff. I mean, it's fascinating to me to be able to dive in and actually find the original ancient ones, whatever you want to call them, that constructed this and why they did what they did and why were they here and where did they go, if they're coming back, or did they ascend on a higher level of frequency and they're just in a dimension closer to this one on another frequency. I mean, there's so many things we can go into on a dimensional space.
Yeah, that's true. But I think what we're starting to find out is that the great megalithic works, at least again those in Egypt, Peru, Bolivia, possibly Baalbek in Lebanon, and some sites in Turkey, probably predate. Their construction was probably 12,000 plus years ago. So this notion that been hammered into our heads since childhood that civilization rose originally about 5,500 to 6,000 years ago, I think is a complete fallacy. I think that was a renaissance or maybe the second wave of civilization. Mm-hmm. But the stonework itself is telling us that they are of great antiquity, made by people of incredibly sophisticated intelligence.
Right. I so agree with you. And regarding the cataclysmic event, now, I know that you've mentioned that some of these beings went into an underground sanctuary. Is that right? Where I think it was the Inca that went into an underground sanctuary and escaped? Or did they survive?
Well, it is possible. There are some caves and talk of tunnels in Peru, especially in the highlands of Peru, that seem to be very ancient, and they could have been used during this catastrophic event of, again, at least 200 years. If you can imagine plasma lightning striking the Earth over the course of generations, people would have no choice but to live underground. And if you visit the Valley of the Queens and Valley of the Kings in Egypt, if you're allowed access, there are tunnel systems and chambers that go on for miles underneath that area. And it is quite possible that if they were not built, it's obvious that they were built a very, very long time ago, and they would have been the perfect place to live for extensive periods of time by people trying to survive this, this global event.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it takes me to that realm of, did they survive it, or were there survivors after the cataclysmic event that actually managed to, kind of just sustain themselves in these undergrounds?
I think so. I think that's honestly where our idea of caveman comes from. I think those were the people that survived the cataclysmic event. They were reasonably small in number. Probably most of the great experts, the people capable of doing the construction, the people of high spiritual knowledge, they probably would have all, to a great extent, been wiped out. And so humanity would have had to have started from scratch again. If I'm sure you've thought about this, but if you could imagine a major electromagnetic pulse event happening to our planet today, we would be reduced back to a very primitive level, because again, my little tablet here would not be functioning, and power grids, nothing would work. And so we would be back to hunter-gatherers in a very rapid fashion.
What's interesting is, you're right about that, but I wonder, how consciousness would prevail insofar as, okay, something like that happens, but we still have soul and spirit and higher consciousness. So would mankind be able to ascend to that level of consciousness where he doesn't really rely on quote-unquote technology? Because I see a lot of advanced technology, but at the same time I see civilizations going in reverse sometimes. I see a dehumanization going on to some degree.
Definitely. And again, I believe that these people from the distant past were of a higher order of magnitude than us. We tend to think that we're the highest point of evolution because of our cell phone technology, etc. But our dependence on electronics and other wonders of today make things convenient, but they also make us vulnerable to natural events that could come back, such as some kind of cataclysmic event from the heavens.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Now, you've also touched on a twilight sky. At one point, there was a twilight sky. Can you elaborate on that? What would have created just a twilight all the time?
That actually comes from one story from one of my great teachers in Cusco, Dr. Teo Paredes, who's an anthropologist. And through his study of oral tradition from childhood, there's a very specific cave that's located outside of Cusco, which has evidence of stonework, which is literally from an early episode of Star Trek. And his explanation of that is that there were ancient beings who lived or who did the actual work itself, and they lived during a time where the sun was not as intense as it is now, and they did live in virtual twilight all the time. And then there was some kind of solar event that happened that forced them to live underground. That's about as far as I've been able to get with that oral tradition so far, but it's quite fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it certainly is. Yeah, when I think about the twilight sky, yeah. And is there an energetic Stargate type signature associated with the ancient megalithic structures at all? Do you get that impression at all that maybe there's something there that's bigger than what it appears to be?
It could very well be. There are a number of recesses that we find in the bedrock, in the sides of hard stone granite walls, about the size of like an impression about the size of a refrigerator in some cases. So someone could easily fit themselves into that nook area, and it is possible that they were able to utilize such recesses like that to communicate with other people who were in other such recesses, either in the general area, or possibly at great distances as well.
Right, yeah, exactly. That's what comes to mind. And also, with the approximate, can you let us know the approximate elevation at some of these megalithic sites? And is there a correlation in elevation, latitude, and longitude with these sites across the globe?
Well, in the case of Cusco, these sites are located basically between 8 and 13,000 feet in elevation, because that is the area called the highlands of Peru. And Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, which are right next to Lake Titicaca, are located, they're about 13,000 feet high as well. There is a curious band which some researchers have found that links these sites up. I believe it's a band that goes around the Earth about 19 degrees above the equator, but it's on an angle. And so if you follow the line, one point is Easter Island, where you have the giant Moai figures, or some people say the heads. Then the next point is Paracas, where I am exactly right now. The next point after that is Cusco and Machu Picchu. And then as you continue with it, it goes into, I believe, Egypt and Mohenjo-Daro and other, very major ancient sites.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. It sounds like you're in the right place in the illusion of time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good place for you. Power spot for sure. It makes you wonder what they were doing. I always think through frequency there's a machine language associated. In other words, there's some kind of a transmission that's going on with all these power spots that maybe people aren't perceptive enough to pick up on. And I don't know what your take is on that at all.
Well, there are, of course, some major theories that the Earth does have an energetic grid system, that many, if not all of these sites, as well as many others, are located at key points on this global grid. But I think, again, because of the cataclysmic event, none of them function at the same level that they once did. But it is possible when they were all, those that were operating at a specific time, there could have been the capability of communication between them, even telepathic capabilities, etc.
Right, I agree with you on that. So do you think the grid has been damaged by mankind? Has it been through the timeline of man? Or how did that happen, do you think?
Well, I think to start with, it was the cataclysmic event, which shut some of these systems down to a great extent. And then later, of course, other cultures arose and were able to find what was left of these power points, or maybe the power points actually moved. If the planet itself went from being vertical to 23.5 degrees, where it is now, it's possible that the grid itself shifted and that it realigned itself, and that later cultures, such as those in Mexico, etc., built their pyramidal structures on top of these power centers. Very often there is underground water running under these places even to this day, and the water itself can be, as we discussed earlier, an activator of energy, even subtle electrical energy. So sites such as Stonehenge, etc., still seem to have a vibrational function to this very day.
Exactly. And with magnetic north moving towards Siberia, what kind of effect do you think this has on the power spots themselves?
I think it's creating great confusion with them, lessening the energy of some of them, possibly enhancing others. But I think it is quite disruptive to the original function of these structures.
Right. Do you think they can recalibrate or no? Do you think they're intelligent?
Not if the Earth is doing this. I think it's simply the fact that some things have a specific timeline of functionality, and then either that function changes or the energy dissipates to the point where they're no longer active. Again, that would make the difference between the Great Pyramid in Egypt, when it was fully functioning, being a very powerful energy creating a distribution system, to now being a nice place to meditate.
Right, yeah. It seems like it was some kind of a beacon or transmitter, and I'm almost wondering, do you think, I know it had multiple purposes, but I'm wondering if it was a transmitter to other areas in the multiverse, or even, just local planets or celestial bodies. What do you think about that?
It is possible. I honestly don't know who it was who did the building,
Hmm.
but whoever they were, uh, it'll take us a long period of time to even scratch the surface of what the original function would have been.
Right.
You could, of course, come up with any theory about anything, about them being weapons to blast spaceships out of the sky or something, which I think is kind of a bit of a silly idea. But I think we have to spend so much time in the space with as many experts as possible and as many different ideas as possible to come up with some kind of basic understanding of what the original functions in plural could have been.
Right, it makes sense. Yeah, I would hit it from all different angles, with the scientists, and then of course just being there and feeling the energy, and then feeling it at the cellular level. And I don't discount impressions at all with people who are very clear in consciousness. I think there's a lot of truth to that. So what you pick up on as a true psychic could be very, very accurate.
Well, and I love being with other people who have psychic capability as well, as along with very hardline left brain scientists, because it's listening to as many different people as possible who are really thinking and perceiving and taking in information and energy at their own location. That's where I get a lot of my information from, and that's why I'm thankful to be able to go to Egypt once a year with the Kemet School, because we normally have 30 to 40 guests with us, and we attract the most intriguing people from around the planet. Every one of them has an insight from their own perspective.
That's so nice. And when are you doing a tour? Is it September or April? I can't remember now.
It's in April,
Is it?
I
Okay.
believe. I believe it's the 16th to the 28th, but all of that information, of course, is on my website. But it's my yearly ritual to be able to explore, one of the most profound parts of the ancient world, and do that with people of many different disciplines.
Right. Oh, yeah, I'm sure it's wonderful. Yeah, no doubt. And what's your impression of CERN now with all this technology ramping up? What is your impression of the Hadron Collider? Do you think it has a connection to any of the anomalous activity across the globe right now with volcanoes and all the other things that are happening?
Well, the unfortunate thing is that a lot of scientists are quite arrogant, and so they believe that they understand how the planet functions, how the universe functions, what science is, etc. And they're all, not always, but often they will understand perhaps 80% of what it is that they think they know, when they think it's 100%, and they wind up creating things like Fukushima.
Hmm.
So it's the arrogance of modern humanity that thinks that, understands the universe and can play God when big problems can happen. So CERN, I think, definitely is a very intriguing tool, but it could very well be creating all sorts of problems that were not anticipated, and could lead to very disastrous consequences.
I agree with you. Yeah, definitely. And we touched off air a little bit on Fukushima. And so far as radiation hitting North America, and of course, you said south of the equator is pretty much a safe zone. Is that correct?
As far as I know, my part of my scholarly background is marine biology, and so I do know that I try not to spend too much time on subjects like Fukushima, because it's very very depressing. But what seems to be happening is that the radiation, etc., that is emanating from that is going into this giant thing called a gyre, which is in the North Pacific. And so it's moving up towards Alaska, then it moves down the coast of North America mainly, and then it cycles back towards Japan. So all of that is occurring above the equator. Um,
Right.
so as awful as it sounds, I'm hoping that all of that awful activity that's going on will, to some degree, be contained in the North Pacific, and not become a global thing, because that could be, the absolute end game. There's no way they're going to be able to turn that thing off,
Hmm.
or those things off.
Right.
And so my prayer is that somehow it stays within at least a part of the planet and doesn't become global in nature.
Right. I think it was John Hutchinson that was working with frequency to try to neutralize the radiation at Fukushima. I'm not sure what kind of progress he's made, but what's your take on that? The idea of using frequency to neutralize such radiation.
Oh, I think it's a wonderful idea. Hopefully he'll be successful with it.
Yeah, I do too. Well, I just feel like it's really a route to go. I mean, I do believe that can be done. So, with energy and how we all know that energy heals the body when you're using certain frequencies, and obviously you've been around frequency enough to understand it to a higher level. So I suspect we can turn it around if we were really rewiring everything on a higher level.
I hope so.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Well, I still think you're in a great location, like I said. So that's the spot to be. So if you're going to be on the map, you're probably safe.
Well, thank you.
Look on the bright side. Yeah. So what about these obelisks? Now, it's interesting because I know you touched on the resonance structures insofar as, once again, we're working with sound with obelisks. So what do you think they were being used for?
Well, I honestly think that the great obelisks of Egypt were energy receptors,
Mm-hmm.
and that they worked in conjunction with the Great Pyramid, because a sort of basic idea is that the dynastic Egyptians created the obelisks in order to carve their hieroglyphs on them to tell, stories of how the king is, or the queen, or etc. But in general, when you look at the quality of the hieroglyphic carving, it is inferior to the surface of the obelisk itself. And the greatest example of that, again, is this place that many of your listeners will never have heard of, but it's called the Serapeum, and it's located at Saqqara, which is not too far from the Giza Plateau. And the Serapeum is a series of two tunnels that contain 25 or 28 giant boxes made of hard stone. Each one of these boxes has a lid, and the box and lid together weigh 90 to 100 tons. Nothing has ever been found in the boxes. A few of them were exploded, I think, in the late 18th or 19th century because they were believed that the pharaoh's gold would be hiding there, but nothing was ever found inside of them. And the carving on the surface of one of the best of them, which is a very hard granite or even a diorite material, which you could only basically cut with diamond tools, the hieroglyphics are terrible. They look like they were done by an 8-year-old kid with a nail, whereas the surfaces of the stone are technically brilliant. So it's obvious that they were inherited by the dynastic Egyptians, and all the carving was done on the surface. And I think that's the same case with the obelisks. They were originally created for a vibrational purpose because there was one quite large remnant of one still at the Karnak complex. And you're allowed to walk up to it and do it gently, but if you pound your fist against it, it creates a very specific frequency. So that obelisk was designed to vibrate to a very specific tone. Mm-hmm. And I think all of the other great were for the same purpose. They're of different sizes and heights because each one had a very specific function. It's almost like a transistor. They're not all the same. Different ones are used for different reasons, sometimes in conjunction with others, sometimes maybe by themselves.
Wow. What comes to mind is that movie Stargate, of course, and it strikes me as a regeneration chamber to some degree, or maybe for healing, the body. Then again, what else comes to mind is a transport, some way to transport a being. But of course, these were huge. I mean, these were really large, right?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact proportions, but I think the interior of each one, they're about 12 feet long on the inside part and about 6 feet high. And then the lid, which is so oversized, is at least another 4 feet high. So they're massive. The common story is that they were made to bury sacrificial Apis bulls. But no Egyptologist that I know of can explain how the boxes themselves were made, because again, Christopher Dunn, the engineer, contacted a number of different stone companies, fabrication companies in the United States. He sent them a drawing and a photograph of what one of these boxes is, and said, I have an unlimited budget. I want you to make me one. And not one of these companies said they were capable in the 21st century to make a box like that.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting.
They said, we can do it, but it'll require a lid, a base, and 4 sides. And he said, you can't do that. The box has to be one piece. And they said, we don't have the technology to do that.
What does that tell you right there, huh?
Exactly.
That's pretty fascinating. Yeah, that's awesome. That's why I can't figure out why some people want to, say certain people created these things when it's obvious to me that it was an advanced race of some kind. Very, very advanced.
Well, exactly. And the more that your listeners hear this, the more that they look into it themselves, the more that they travel to Egypt and Peru and look at the evidence for themselves, they'll see that we've been deceived as regards our history. Maybe it was out of ignorance, maybe it was out of control, but the bottom line is a third chunk of our history is, we were taught lies in school, and it's time to get the real education if you're fortunate enough to actually do it in the field yourself. And that's why I feel I am very fortunate in that I'm able to visit these places. And whenever possible, I try to bring people with me to let them feel, touch, look, and think for themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, I think it's about cellular memory, too, when you travel to these ancient sites. It's just about a reactivation or maybe an uncovering of something at the cellular level for people, because there's a soul and spirit in a suit wandering the earth, obviously. And when we go to these sacred sites, something happens beyond it all. And I think you're so right about, I applaud you for the work you do, because we certainly need this information out there. We need the truth out there as best as we can define it. And all this obfuscation that it just needs to all just go away. I mean, it's just amazing to me. If we had started with the truths from point A to point B, we would have had such a different civilization, in my opinion.
Exactly. We would have free energy now because that's what they had in the past.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So people are trying to reinvent, we're in a process of reinvention, not invention. It's like Nikola Tesla obviously discovered the secrets of the ancients. He reinvented something, as well as the man who made Coral Castle in Florida. He supposedly said, I know the secret of the pyramids. He knew how to at least if nothing else, neutralize gravity using some kind of device that he built himself.
Right. I think that was... Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I didn't mean to walk on you, but wasn't that through magnetism?
I believe so. I believe he was able to figure out the frequency of the material, which was the calcium carbonate coral that he was working with in Florida, and then he was able to probably neutralize gravity by matching the whatever frequency it was that that allowed him to be able to turn very heavy stone into styrofoam, basically, in terms of its density temporarily.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Wouldn't you say magnetism creates a gravitational field?
Yeah, actually, that's something that I would love to have more physicists come into the field with us so that I can be more greatly educated about that. But that's definitely what we're talking about.
Right, that's what I'm seeing, because I think it's more, people use the word gravity, but it just doesn't ring true for some reason. But when I see magnetism, and it feels like that's actually the cause of a gravitational field. But I find it fascinating as well. It's just I can just go for level to level to level about all this stuff. It's really interesting. Then of course the concept of floating the objects. What is your take on that possibility in ancient Egypt, for example? Do you think they could have floated these things, these objects and these blocks?
I think they honestly, I think they had to. Some theories are that the quarry where some of the granite, or most of the granite that's on the Giza Plateau and places comes from, the famous rose granite, comes from the Aswan area, which is at least 500 miles away. So the conventional theory, again, is that the Egyptians built boats or ships or rafts or something. They don't say where they got the material from to make them of this kind of scale, but then they floated the stone, 500-ton blocks, 100-ton blocks, in cases 1,000-ton blocks from, or at least objects from Aswan, and floated them down the Nile to Cairo, and then put them on wooden rollers and drag them across the sand. And it's, if you ask any engineer, they simply break out laughing with that idea. And so obviously there was some technology that was involved that possibly enable these people to levitate the stone and float it across the desert. I think it's the only thing we can look at. We don't. There is no theory that I've read about in Egyptology that makes any sense whatsoever as regards the movement, the cutting, the shaping, and the fineness of fit of this stone material.
Exactly. And with that being said, we're going to head for a quick break. Everybody, please stay tuned at the Dark Matter Digital Network. My special guest, Brien Foerster. Dark Matter Digital Network. This is Hyperspace. I'm Solaris BlueRaven, and I'm here with my very special guest, Brien Foerster. Brien, you with me?
Yes, I am.
All right. I'm so glad to have you on tonight. This has been fascinating. And, we're discussing the levitation of stones, and I'm wondering, obviously, it sounds to me like they were using frequency and sound to levitate these objects.
I honestly, even from a scientific level, I think we have to look at it that way, because I do know the latest theory that came out recently about how the great limestone blocks that, again, constructed the Great Pyramid, of which there are 2.3 million of them, that the ancient Egyptians used milk to lubricate the sand. And if that isn't a silly idea, I don't know what is. So we have to look at alternative explanations and the possibility that we are not the most sophisticated species or descendants of species to ever exist on this planet.
Right. And how much of those blocks are actually containing quartz?
That's a very good point. It's actually the granite and the diorite that are part of the core of the Great Pyramid that contain high feldspar and granite. The limestone itself doesn't, but it seems like the limestone was used, at least the casing stone was used more of an insulator to contain the energy inside the pyramid itself.
Right. Yeah, quartz comes to mind. It's such an amplifier. That's why I was curious, insofar as what they were using. It seems to me like that would be one of the best ones for healing and resonance and transmission of energy, just like a computer.
No, that's a very good point. And especially up in the area of Cusco, Peru, where we find the great megalithic sites of Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and even Machu Picchu, almost all of the stone that was used in the construction of those ancient sites is very high in quartz crystal. And whoever the builders were, they would go as far as they needed to in order to acquire the right material. It was not usually local stone. In one case, one of the most beautiful buildings in Cusco itself, which is of incredible high precision. Again, you can't fit a human hair in the joins. That stone all came from 30 plus miles away, from a very specific quarry.
Right, yeah, it's so fascinating. What comes to mind is I would love to have a crystal flute made of quartz and just play it in the pyramids. Would that be fun? But that'd be nice to do that.
Wow.
Yeah, did you ever have anybody go in there with instruments to play?
I don't think it's allowed anymore. People have in the past. Some very interesting studies were done in the past, bringing equipment into the King's Chamber, testing for sonic patterns and things like that. But the government's become more restrictive. Hopefully, it'll loosen up in the future so that people can do much more advanced work.
Right. I remember Paul Horn put out some beautiful music with the flute in the I think it was the Great Pyramid. I don't know if you remember that or not, but it was gorgeous. And this was
he did.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, but the energy associated. So that's kind of sad that they're, obviously there's something that goes on in consciousness and energy when people are in there generating some kind of a sound and tone, which I suspect is why they're trying to downplay it now, because they do know it amplifies, I'm sure.
Yeah, they have to at this point. It's quite obvious.
Yeah, alters reality. And I'm under the impression that we live in a multidimensional design, multidimensional states of, we exist as multidimensional beings. So with that comes multidimensional states of consciousness associated with whatever we're doing and wherever we are. So I would suspect those pyramids are just phenomenal. And of course, that's on my bucket list because I've yet to be over there, but I definitely have to get over there before I dissipate
Huh.
and transfer to the next level, wherever the heck I go.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, one point I'd very much like to make to you and your listeners is don't listen to all of the hype on TV or in the papers or the radio about what's going on in Egypt. Egypt is very safe. I would go tomorrow. But for some reason, if there's a little incident that happens anywhere in the country, they automatically blow it out of proportion and make it seem like Egypt is dangerous for tourists, and it isn't at all. The only people in danger in Egypt are the Egyptians because tourism has plummeted by 95% because people are simply afraid to go. Those who, are a little bit brave, I wouldn't say you have to be very brave, but those who are a little bit brave and go there will find places, all of these beautiful ancient sites with almost no one there, so you get to have them all to yourselves.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'm glad you said that because I think that a lot of people do get spooked about traveling over there. And I know that's crossed my mind as well. How safe is it for a woman, female American to travel over there? So yeah, I think that's important that you mentioned that.
Well, especially if you go with a very good, guide travel service. Again, I'll plug the Kemet School because I think they're the finest, and they treat everyone beautifully. It's basically our tour is a 5-star experience. It's not overly expensive, but everyone is treated as a dignitary when they get to Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I encourage everybody to check it out, of course. And which website would that be?
It's www.chemitology.com. Chemitology, I think, but it's on my web. I have a lot of their stuff on my website because I am basically linked with them. So if you just go to my website, hiddentours.com, you'll find a lot about the Kemet School.
That's awesome. And I also like the fact that you touch on the pyramids were not created as tombs because so many have suggested that, and I like the way that you're kind of moving that along, so to speak. So I appreciate you doing that. Because many people still are under that impression.
Well, they are. And the thing is that, again, with the Giza Plateau being riddled with tunnels and also massive shafts that go down that connect with the tunnels, there are many chambers which were used by the dynastic Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, as tombs. But rather than cut them out of the bedrock, they simply found them as empty chambers. So, of course, they would go in. As some people know, there is no ornamentation whatsoever inside the Great Pyramid because it was not designed as a tomb. If it had been designed as a tomb, all the walls would be adorned with hieroglyphics and carvings, but there's none. But if you inherit an area of land like that, and then you find these chambers, naturally you will when your grandfather dies or whatever, and you have access to one of these chambers, you'll go in there and carve a hieroglyphic eulogy for him or her, and bury them there.
Right.
But rather than carve them, they simply found them and said, "Well, this makes a great tomb here. Let's use it."
Right, exactly. And how many of the underground tunnels actually have been kind of sealed off on purpose through government, and nobody gets to investigate those areas?
Almost all of them.
Oh, gosh. So they obviously have done the investigation. I mean, somebody's been down there, right?
Oh, yeah. There's one that was found relatively recently called the Osirian Shaft, and it is mind-boggling. It goes down several hundred feet into the bed, like carved into the bedrock. And there are side channels partway down. They found, again, these massive stone boxes, which they wanted to label sarcophagi, but were not that. But that's been sealed off now for a number of years. There's still a lot of water running through the tunnel system. So that's why when they find one of these ancient shafts and go down into it, they find at the bottom a lot of water.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So do you think the ancient, or rather the Egyptian government has found ancient artifacts which can solve some of the equation to what and who was responsible for the pyramids?
I'm sure they have. It's just like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, or yeah, where they find the Ark of the Covenant, and then they go, "Oh my God, what a great discovery! Let's show the world." And then it gets thrown into a box, and then a number's put on it, and it gets warehoused with millions of other artifacts. I think if you go to not only the Cairo Museum, but many museums around the world, there are out-of-place artifacts that don't fit in with the conventional story, and so they're simply labeled, boxed, and for hopefully not forever.
Right. And of course, at the museums now, you're not able to take photographs. Is that correct?
In many museums, and even more so, some of the explanation for why you're not allowed to take photographs is that you'll damage the artifacts, which is completely false because it's only an old-fashioned flash bulb that would create any problems, with a painting or something. But when you're looking at a stone box, how is taking a photograph with a flash going to hurt it? Mm-hmm. So some other reasons are that they want to sell postcards or books or DVDs. But in many cases, it's simply, especially when it comes to the very interesting artifacts, they won't let you photograph them because they don't want the story to change, based upon what their quite boring paradigm has become.
Right. And also what comes to mind is replicas. I mean, how many of those objects are actually not the real deal and just a replica?
In some cases, but luckily in the Cairo Museum, there are some artifacts which are...
Oh, there are legit, right?
And they are astonishing. But one of them, for example, looks like a propeller or impeller made out of very fine stone with blades on it. And it's, I think, described as a lotus bowl or fruit plate, when in fact it definitely looks like it was part of an ancient machine.
That's fascinating. That makes me wonder. Well, regarding those underground tunnels, that really sparks my interest. You say they go down several hundred feet into the bedrock. Now, how far do they go down? I mean, how long are we talking here, and where do they connect? Where do they interconnect?
Well, we don't honestly know how far down they go. They go down hundreds of feet, most likely. One man who actually was the father of the Kemet school, whose name was Abdel Hakim Awiyan, who grew up across the street from the Sphinx where his family still lives. When he was a child, there was no wall around the Giza Plateau. There were no ticket booths or anything like that. So the Giza Plateau was his playground. And at one point he said that he went he found a shaft at the site of Saqqara, which has now been concreted over. And he was able to travel down that shaft into a tunnel. And for, I think, hours, he swam and crawled and walked and finally wound up coming out at the Giza Plateau. And he was not a man to make up stories. He was describing events that happened in his childhood. And he actually started to be a tour guide, I believe, when he was about 8 years old. And by the time he died in his early 80s, I believe, he was probably the foremost at least local authority as regards the history of ancient Egypt. He also had 2 university degrees, but he was largely dismissed by foreign academia, in some part because he was Egyptian.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, that's fascinating. So how deep do you think the water was in those underground shafts or areas?
Well, I think that the whole system, again, carried water from the ancient Nile. They're probably gravity fed to some degree. So some of the tunnels would be quite deep, and the water would be gravity fed to go under the Giza Plateau, set up certain vibrations to generate acoustic or other forms of energy that would travel up through the system and then cause vibration inside the Great Pyramid, the Second Pyramid, and the Third Pyramid, as well as other structures, probably to the north, south, east, and west.
Wow, that's fascinating. It would be nice to be able to go and just see it on that timeline. It exists in its peak. That'd just be fascinating to watch that.
True.
Yeah, how incredible. And of course, weren't the pyramids originally supposed to have been white?
Yeah, the Great Pyramid was white. The one they call Menkaure, I prefer to call them the Great Pyramid, the Second and the Third Pyramid, because the names that have been attributed to them by Egyptologists are based on that they were tombs of tombs of dead pharaohs. And so the Great Pyramid was white. The Menkaure Third Pyramid, I believe, was half, or at least the lower courses were red or pink granite, and then the upper courses, I think, were actually limestone. And the second pyramid, I can't remember exactly, but each one had a different type of casing stone. Again, not because the architect, decided that, or the pharaoh told the architect, I'd like mine to be white, and I want mine to be part pink because I want it to look different from my dad or grandfather or whatever. I think they all dealt with, it was all to deal with insulation, and or transmission of energy through stone, and that's why I have to go once every year, because I still think I'm in my infancy in regards to this, and the whole area fascinates me so much that I'll clearly spend the rest of my life, visiting Egypt.
Mm-hmm. I don't blame you. And of course, I would suspect you find something different each time. You notice something maybe you didn't notice the last time. Does that happen?
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much there.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
There's so much to see. Yeah, the first time you go, you're just overwhelmed by the scale. The Great Pyramid's 500 feet tall. It's an artificial construction. But there's so much more. The Serapeum underground, Karnak, Luxor, Aswan Quarry, where the largest obelisk was never completed. It would have weighed 1,200 tons. But after being blown away by the first trip, the second trip, you start to focus a little more. Then the third trip, you're focusing even more. There's certain things you want to see again, other things you don't really want to bother seeing again. But the more you examine, the more the subtleties come out. The tool marks start to show up. The impossible nature of how the dynastic Egyptians could have done them come out. So you do have to spend an entire lifetime studying them, right, in order to even start to figure out what was going on.
Mm-hmm. And it's quite a blessing, I'm sure, just to be witnessing this particular event and structure in its own. And also now, with the Great Pyramid, I didn't mean to cut you off for a second there, but I was going to ask you, was the capstone copper or gold?
We don't even know if there was a capstone.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Some people think there was a gold capstone, but I don't know if that's the case. It is possible. It is possible that the exterior of the Great Pyramid was white Tellura limestone, because it doesn't contain a lot of elements other than pure calcium carbonate. So it would be a beautiful insulator. So if there was an attempt to have the energy emanate from the Great Pyramid in a very focused manner in a small area, then a gold capstone, being an excellent conductor of energy, of course, would be the way to do it. However, I don't think anyone can honestly say there was a capstone. The top is missing, but whether that's the case of it falling off during the cataclysm, which could have shaken off the skin of the pyramid itself, or whether somebody came and recycled the gold, as people have a tendency to do, to make other objects out of.
Right. Wow. I always heard the stories of a capstone, so that's very interesting. And now people really don't even know if they had one, legitimately speaking. So that's really interesting. So what does your psychic radar tell you?
At this point, I'm still not sure.
Okay.
There could have been, if there had been one, then either the dynastic Egyptians, I think, or somebody, a primitive culture possibly before them could have taken it, because in almost any culture, possibly every culture on the planet, there is some obsession with gold, even on a very subconscious level. There's something about that material beyond any other metal that draws our attention, whether it's for scientific or electronic purposes, or the fact that it's so rare or whatever. There's this human thing about gold I find quite intriguing.
Right. Well, of course, then there's the monoatomic gold, and yeah, it's supposed to be very good for you. So and help you with enlightenment. So perhaps maybe that's what it's about. Maybe subconsciously they're attracted to the golden frequency.
Could very well be.
Yeah. So any thoughts on what culture or species are we talking a species, maybe an off-world species that created these ancient structures? Do you have any insight at all insofar as what you think it might have been, Atlanteans or Lemurian?
I honestly have a difficult time with the concept of Atlantis being a continent because again the evidence is showing that the sea level rose very rapidly when Atlantis was supposed to have crumbled and whatever, but clearly when that event happened, the rising of sea level by 100 meters or more than 300 feet would have caused any culture located anywhere near the coastline of any of the islands or continents to abandon if they could. Mm-hmm. I mean, it might have happened so rapidly that cities were submerged underwater and still are to this very day. So I think there was definitely at least one, if not more, global cultures that existed that had very sophisticated levels of technology. They were destroyed to a large part by this event of about 12,000 years ago. On the case of Lemuria, I believe that Mu could have been a landmass. You told me before the interview that you had spent some time in Hawaii, and mm-hmm. I have too. There's a lot of mystery there that is not well known. What we do know is 12,000 years ago, almost all of the Hawaiian Islands were connected to one another. So that would have created quite a large landmass, and there are oral traditions in Hawaii that the existence of people on those islands is far older than the Polynesians of, say, 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that's my sense of what Mu or Lemuria was. In terms of Atlantis, there could have been major islands of some kind around the Gulf of Mexico that have been submerged, or not submerged, but the water level have buried them, such as the Bimini Road, mm-hmm. And many, many places underwater. I do know that also Graham Hancock wrote a book called Underworld, where he tried to document a number of these underwater cities and other structures, and he was thwarted to a great extent by many of the governments who basically told him you're not allowed to dive in these sites.
Really?
So what is it that they have to hide if they're not trying to cover something up?
Yes, exactly. Wow. Well, there's so many mysteries in the seas themselves. And wasn't it off the coast of Japan? They had that the pyramids, some pyramids over there too.
Well, there's a structure called Yonaguni, which is off an island called Yonaguni. Some people believe that it's a carved, massive hunk of stone. Other people think that it's natural erosion. But definitely, it's not that deep. I think the top of it is something like 50 to 100 feet underwater. Mm-hmm. So 12,000 years ago, it would have been, the whole thing would have been on the surface. I would love at some point to be able to go diving there and see it for myself. Mm-hmm. It's just not presently in the itinerary.
Right. There's so many mysteries, like I said. That is interesting about the government, though, how they discouraged him from going down there. So he could not get any more access?
No, he was, from what I've heard, he was thwarted by a number of different governments. He would be given a permit to dive on a specific day. So then he, of course, would make all the plans by, hiring the boat and getting the scuba gear and the captain of the ship and all this kind of thing. And then before he's about to start on his adventure, it's like, no, sorry, we've decided to take the license away from you, or the permit away from you. Probably attempting to bankrupt him in the process. But what is known is that when there was the great tsunami that happened in Southeast Asia, however number of years ago, I can't remember. But supposedly fishermen who were, out at sea off the south coast of India, because the tsunami itself had to fuel itself by pulling water back from the shoreline to feed itself, all of these buildings suddenly appeared as the water was receding. This is documented in a number of countries, I believe. And then, as the tsunami came in, they were reburied, and they have found a fair amount of evidence of cities off the south coast of India, which are quite extensive in size. But again, Indian government supposedly won't allow you to dive there for some kind of reason.
Right. Well, it sounds like there might be some underwater bases as well, and who knows how many military bases underwater.
Oh,
So,
sure,
yeah,
sure.
so that's part of it. I always said if you were to drain all the oceans, we'd see quite the alien landscape, you know?
Well, I'm sure there are modern submarine bases which are they must have tunnels that where they can hide them
Oh,
away
yeah.
from any kind of electronic, and maybe some of these tunnels are indeed very ancient or simply being recycled.
Right. So I do have that sense that, yeah, that the what you might call the black technology program, they must have access to all of this information that everybody's investigating. I can't imagine them not knowing about a lot of this or having access to some of these ancient, structures, even if they're underwater.
Yeah, one could well imagine. I'm sure many different governments of the world know a lot more than they want us to know about. But through the internet, etc., we're able to start to chop away at some of this stuff and reveal aspects of history that have either been ignored or deliberately or ignorantly attempted to cover up.
Right. Yeah. Lifting the veil. That's what it's all about.
Exactly.
That's a good thing. You know what comes to mind when we're talking about the obelisk, and of course, there's mention of the moon having a bell-like ring to it as well. Is there any correlation? Do you see any connection to that at all, or no?
I honestly don't know. I've heard of a number of theories of the moon being something that was drawn into the solar system. It may have happened during the last cataclysm because our 12,000 years ago, because our history in general doesn't go back all that far. And when you get into oral tradition, they tend to not be able to let you know any kind of timeline. Especially, I've spent most of my life around Native American people because I felt they were the best teachers of the landscape rather than that's why growing up on the west coast of Canada, I took an interest in totem pole carving because the history of the Haida and other people is much more extensive than the white settlers who have been there for 160 years. But again, the problem with oral tradition is that they, in general, won't give you a timeline. They'll say in the distant past this happened, that the moon appeared or whatever. But it is possible. It's just that's something I'd like to spend more time with astronomers and geophysicists to explore.
Right. Well, when you think about it, if that is the case where the moon was ringing like a bell, and then we have, objects here that have that resonance, I'm just curious insofar as what they were trying to establish with that resonance with the moon, whatever species was at that quote unquote monitoring station, whatever you want to call it. But it's quite fascinating. I agree. And I did want to ask you real quick about the totem pole history. And a lot of people don't know about totem poles insofar as what they represent, what they mean.
Well, totem poles in general are and were found on mainly the west coast of Canada. There was some native people in parts of Alaska also created totem poles, but the actual true totem pole that we think of is and was the creation of the Haida people of the Queen Charlotte Islands, also the Kwaggle people of Vancouver Island, the Tlingit people of northern coastal British Columbia, and the Tsimshian people. And in general, what they represented was it would be a wealthy chief who would have a totem pole made to display to his people and visitors his genealogy. So it would include all of the heraldic crests, animal figures that his oral tradition related to. So often you'd have an animal, like you'd have a bear and a raven, an eagle, thunderbird, etc. But every animal that would be depicted would be a representation of part of his or her oral tradition.
Right. That's fascinating. But they weren't used as wards, were they, insofar as warding off other tribes or other areas?
No, it was more a celebration of tradition and ancestry.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Yeah, I saw a few of those on Maui. I'm sure you probably have too, but Yeah, I don't think a lot of people pay attention to those, but it's very, very fascinating. And I do have a question for you. I've talked with author, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, Henry Kroll in the past, and he's an interesting fellow out of Alaska who's published a few books, but he was under the impression that our sun was birthed out of Orion. So what is your take on that?
Our sun was burst out of Orion?
Yeah, he's come to some conclusion that he thinks that our sun was actually birthed out of Orion, that's where it originated from. You ever heard anything like that or no?
Actually, nothing related to that. What is kind of intriguing me more and more in time is the Sirius star system, because that seems to show up in many different cultures as being a place of the source. Of course, the Pleiades are kind of the obvious ones when it comes to, mankind came from the Pleiades, and Billy Meyer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's the and the Pleiades do show up in a number of different oral traditions amongst native people. I've never understood why they would focus on such a tiny little group, little dots in the sky like that, if there wasn't something truthful about what they were saying. But I'm exploring more and more the concept of Sirius, because I just noticed that Sirius shows up in a number of oral traditions in South America and some other parts of the world as being the place of origin.
That's very interesting. Do they give a description? Is it about a species or?
It's basically about the ancestor. That's where the ancestors came from.
Very interesting. Well, I don't discount anything when it comes to Sirius and also the Pleiadians. And I've heard that also, a lot of correlation with Pleiadian for sure. But what about Orion? Everything seems to be in correlation with Orion too.
Yeah, Orion seems to be very, very important as well. So I've actually, most people know of the Pleiades as, as being, a place where ancestral beings may have come from. But I've read a lot of different historical or oral tradition accounts of that. Again, why would people choose this little cluster of stars if there wasn't something truthful about it? But at the moment, Sirius seems to be the one that has kind of piqued my interest.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. Well, I know Sirius correlates with advanced technology to some degree in scientists. So, and then the Pleiadians were about sound and music, from what I understand. So it's very interesting, the whole thing. And who knows? I mean, I'm sure in our bloodline of DNA, on a celestial level in heritage, we're all connected and related to these species. And, we're all pretty much merged to the same ancestor. If we were to really look, I suspect it's right there, hidden in plain sight in the DNA. But that's my own take anyway. But is there a record of the visitors? I mean, you mentioned this, that they have storytelling and they talk about this, but did they have an actual experience and visitation?
Yeah, well, of course, in a number of different traditions, they talk about this. The other intriguing thing is the idea about the children of the sun. There's so many examples of that, and what does that really mean? Amongst the Inca, what is commonly thought is that the Inca worshiped the sun, but that's not what they did. That's such a simplistic idea. The Inca, at least on some level, understood that the sun is the source of energy. And so in order to understand what creation is and who the creator would be, they used the sun as a symbol of energy. But what they were referring to when they would do their prayers and things like that was the energy behind, what was behind the sun. Not the sun itself as a thing, but the sun represents creation because it causes, without it we're dead. It causes plants to grow, etc. So this idea that the Inca themselves called themselves the children of the sun itself, I find very intriguing, because it does make it sound as though their origins were off-world. Whether they're referring to the sun itself or somewhere out in space is something still to be sought after. And I'm very fortunate. That's why we spend a lot of time in Cusco, because there are still wisdom keepers and keepers of oral tradition that live in Cusco. The unfortunate thing is there is no one expert. You have to meet with a number of them and try to weave the story back together as best as you can.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, according to Ascension, and those of us who work in the Ascension realm, it's all about activating light body with the sun and DNA activation through higher consciousness. It's all driven by the light of the sun and the transmission that comes through. And of course, to me, the sun is a stargate. So maybe that's what they were really referring to as they're beyond the source of energy, beyond that design. Maybe it's the idea of the stargate connection to the sun. What's your impression of that?
No, that could very well be.
It's really fascinating when you think about it, because I always see things on a multidimensional level. I have to look at it from a very multi-dimensional, multiversal perspective when I experience things. But yeah, I believe that your path of spirit is almost fated. It seems to me like you were just destined to do the work you're doing, huh?
It feels like it. It honestly feels like I'm on a path that I'm supposed to be on. That it's taken this time in order to get the right amount of educational development, spiritual development, scientific knowledge, etc., to be able to do what it is I'm doing. I'm actually quite in shock that people phone me up and want to interview me still, but
really,
I'm going, well, no, I'm trying to be modest about it, because it's too easy to become, to start to become arrogant and go, gee, people know who I am. But I try to keep myself in check on that level. I'm very thankful that people want to hear about what I have to say and my experiences, and it's wonderful to be with people in the field to see what their thought base is and what their experience is, impressions, etc.
Mm-hmm. Well, we need beings like you on the timeline. There's no doubt about it. I mean, somebody's got to go over there and research this stuff and report back and let everybody know what's really going on. So I certainly appreciate your information and your wisdom. There's no doubt about that. And I know the listeners do.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. And once again, I recommend people check out your YouTube page, because I could just sit there for hours and watch all of that footage. It's wonderful.
Oh, thanks. I try to put up a new video every 4 to 5 days. I'm kind of falling behind at the moment, but I do have a huge backlog of video content from the last trip to Egypt, from the high jungle of Peru. We're going to Australia in about 10 days and film some strange things there in New Zealand. And I'm very thankful that people are so interested. More than almost 21 million views now. So that's it's great that it's creating some kind of impact.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. So what's going on in Australia? Can you talk about it or no?
Yeah, it's 2 conferences I'm giving, along with some of your audience might know Michael Tellinger from South Africa, and then also Evan Strong from Australia and his father. And we're giving all-day talks in Sydney on the 16th of August, and then Melbourne on the 22nd of August. And we also get to see what are called the Gosford glyphs, which are these Egyptian-style hieroglyphics quite near to Sydney, carved in the side of a hill in the bedrock. Most academics think that they're complete forgeries, but we've been fortunate to have Yusuf Awiyan and Mohammed Ibrahim, who is a hieroglyphics expert from Egypt. Both of them worked together and spent many hours looking at and video, and they have decoded what the Gosford glyphs say, and they say they are completely authentic, that they were done by Egyptians, 1500 BC approximately, and so I'm looking forward to seeing them in person. So that shows that there could very well have been contact between ancient Egypt and the east coast of Australia 3,500 years ago.
Oh, that's fascinating. Wow. Is that going to be filmed? Are you going to record that or no?
Oh, you bet.
Yeah, excellent. That's wonderful. Yeah, looking forward to that one. Well, if I was over there, I'd definitely go check it out for sure. I have a lot of Aussie friends over there, so I'll let them know. That'll be fun. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, for sure. So what's your take on, everybody's talking about Planet X and Nibiru. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Not too much. I've only been able to read up to about page 10 of any Zecharia Sitchin book. His stuff just doesn't resonate with me, so I can't discount it. It just doesn't. It's not. You can only focus your energy on so many things, or at least I try to, because I don't want to be somebody who can be asked a question about any ancient mystery on the earth and have an answer.
Right.
I'd rather kind of focus my attention on parts of the earth and develop some level of expertise on that, rather than being another encyclopedia of ancient mysteries.
I can respect that. That's very good. Yeah, I'm curious about that. I know there's a lot of hoopla about it, and I don't really know what to make of it myself. So I was just wondering. And of course, when you look at all these different species and races, as we discussed earlier, I mean, the ancient ones, what I call maybe the ancient race of which created some of these structures, you have to ask why were they here, and where did they go, and will they return? I guess is the word. I'm really curious to see or hear why these beings just kind of phase shifted away, left all these remnants behind, but it's like, are they coming back, or is it just a shell of where they were and on the evolutionary scale?
Yeah, and why did they come? Why would they have come here in the first place? Why select this little blue ball in the universe? I honestly have no idea why they would, but the stonework is telling us something far more intriguing than what standard academia says, and we're fortunate that we have these remnants. Many ancient beautiful sites have been destroyed over the course of time. A lot of ancient Egyptian sites were, destroyed by succeeding cultures. In Peru, almost all of Cusco was taken apart by the Spanish when they arrived, starting in 1533. So they would have destroyed many beautiful ancient monuments and things, calling them, paganistic or whatever. So we're just fortunate that we do have what we still do have to explore. One of the saddest cases is the site of Pumapunku on the Altiplano of Bolivia, which is part of Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku and Pumapunku are basically the same thing. It's just the archaeologists have decided to build a fence around one and then a fence around the other one and give them different names. But there we have levels of precision which are just stupefying. And again, engineers that I travel with there, people who are stone cutters or masons or people involved in technology, are just completely dumbfounded when they see some of the remnants of what's still there. Most of it, of the site, has been destroyed over the course of the last 1,000 years, but what remains is absolutely mind-boggling. We don't have the technology present to be able to do some of the work that we see there. It's just, it's one of my favorite places because I don't know if I'll ever be able to figure it out, but it keeps drawing me back and back because it's clear that the ancient ones want us to understand who they were, and why they did this work.
Right, that's what I'm wondering, because there's a story behind it all. It's almost like there's something buried beneath it all, behind all of this. There must be something there, unless some of these covert governments, took some ancient artifacts or something. But I'm thinking to myself, there has to be something left besides just what we're seeing, And some of it's been cannibalized, as you've mentioned. I mean, it's kind of sad to some degree, but I just believe that there's still something there that people have overlooked, and I don't know what your take is on that.
Oh, no, definitely, because one of my latest great teachers is a Bolivian man called Antonio Portugal. He spent 40 or 50 years of his life exploring, especially in Bolivia and at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku and other locations. And he's worked actually with major archaeologists. They have found some amazing underground structures which they've had to partially excavate and then rebury because they simply don't have the resources to be able to do a proper excavation. But he believes that there are tunnels and chambers underneath Tiwanaku and Pumapunku that maybe even the Bolivian government may not know of their existence. So he's working very hard, even with the vice president of Bolivia itself, to try to acquire the funds to be able to do excavations in these sites in order to expose even more enigmatic stuff than there is on the surface. And he's 100% genuine, not some kind of fake guy trying to make up stories. for his own and make himself famous. He's very serious about this stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah, and I'm sure they have imaging systems where they can actually see more than the average bear. I mean, if you can't dig, isn't there a penetrating system, an imaging system you can use, or no?
Oh, yeah, exactly. And the little that they have done at Tiwanaku with ground penetrating radar, they have found chambers underneath.
Mm-hmm.
It's just they have not been able to. It's easy for people to say, well, why don't they just dig them up? You don't understand how sensitive these sites can be. If you start to do an excavation, you could very well have local people or even people fly in from other parts of the world to show up at midnight when there's nobody there with their own shovel and flashlights and see if they can find some gold or other artifacts. So this has to be done in a very careful manner.
Right. Yeah. Hidden in plain sight. I think a lot of it is. So
Yeah.
it's really fascinating. You know what comes to mind, and I don't know if you've ever heard any stories about at the Great Pyramid. If there's actually is there something really deep beneath the Great Pyramid, like a pyramid in reverse? I know there's been stories on an energetic scale that there is a pyramid in reverse that kind of it's like a polarization of the Great Pyramid that's beneath the pyramid. Have you heard that before or no?
Not really. Again,
Okay.
I've been 3 levels under the Giza Plateau, so I know there is a tunnel system.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I've been told it goes hundreds of feet deeper, and that they get bigger.
Mm.
So the Giza Plateau is almost like is a system of tunnels going east, west, north, and south, and could go linking other ancient sites up. According to the Kemet School, the ancient area that we're talking about, where most of this megalithic work is, they call it Kemet, which means the Black Land, and that is the ancient name of Egypt before it was called Egypt. and it's not a huge area, but inside that space, going from a site called Abu Rawash, where there are the remains of a pyramid that either exploded or was taken apart, into the area of Dashur. That's where all of the really interesting stuff in ancient Egypt is, and there's evidence of not only amazing stuff on the surface, such as the original pyramids, not the mud brick ones that the later Egyptians made, but the ones that are solid stone are, and also tunnel systems, and the tunnels may connect all of these sites together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And have you noticed many UFO sightings over there in Egypt or no?
I haven't personally. I've had 2 very interesting UFO sightings in my life that were very realistic, and a couple of lesser ones. And so, anyone that I know who says UFOs don't exist or I don't believe in them are clearly people who have never seen one.
Mm-hmm.
If you've seen one, you're looking at something which causes the core of your being to go into a state of awe and shock at the same time, because you're looking at something that's not supposed to exist. But I've had 2 very interesting encounters for a duration of at least 5 minutes, where I
Wow.
was able to look and think about this and go through, my brain in both cases just went on overdrive because it was trying to compartmentalize what it is I was looking at, and there was no box to fit these things into. That's why people say it wasn't a plane, it wasn't a helicopter or swab gas or something. It's because it's a phenomenon that isn't supposed to be there.
Right. Yeah. And can I ask where this was and what year?
Yeah, one was actually on Maui.
Nice.
And since you're acquainted with Maui, it was actually this ship that was at least a couple of 100 feet long, shiny brushed aluminum look, was up on the side of Haleakala,
Ah.
which is not where airplanes are supposed to be, at least not commercial jets. And I saw that on and off for about 10 minutes. And then the other one actually was here in Paracas about 3 years ago, about 1 o'clock in the morning. It was 12 yellow objects of light that were coherent in terms of how they were moving amongst each other, but it looked like it looked like looking at 12 yellow dots on a petri dish that were moving around. They were moving in formation, but they were moving amongst each other at the same time. And that lasted, again, about 10 minutes.
Oh, wow. That sounds fascinating. That's a blessing.
It was. It was great.
Yeah. What's interesting, I know we touched about this, we talked about it off air, but, the fact that you guys don't have chemtrails over there is huge.
It is.
I mean, because we're saturated over here on the mainland, and I'm so glad to hear that you guys are not getting bombarded with all those chemicals and things like that. And I wonder if that has something to do with maybe having more visibility with UFOs.
I think it's more that actually, if your listeners are interested in that topic, I would definitely look up the work of Dane Wigington, who lives in Northern California. He is an expert on this because it's affecting his life. He has one of the largest solar arrays on the planet in terms of powering a house, and he noticed a number of years ago that all of a sudden his power load kept dropping, and he has a number of videos up on YouTube. He's a very passionate speaker. He has a very scientific mind about this, and he is doing this because he's afraid of his children's future.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for his information. There's no doubt about it. We're getting ready to wrap this up pretty soon here. We've got about 3 minutes here, Brien, and I just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been an incredible interview. I really appreciate you coming on board with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is hiddenincatours.com. That's my main website. The other one is in development. It's up and running and has huge amounts of content. And it is hiddenhumanhistory.com. So I'm planning on expanding that into a huge, massive database with contributions from other experts and interested people from all over the planet.
Excellent. And are you doing any lectures soon? I know you're doing the one in Australia. What about any new books coming out? Number 17 I'm working on right now. It's going to be about the feathered serpent, about the character called Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, and also Viracocha, who is thought of in Mesoamerica and Peru to have been either an ancient teacher or a number of ancient teachers who came from some far off land and educated the people in science and art and then left. It seems to be a description of the same person or same people, but different time frames. So we have a tour of ancient Mexico in February, and so I'll be able to visit some of the Olmec sites, which very much tend to have a temple to either Kukulkan or to Quetzalcoatl, and so that's the book I'm thinking about doing right now. Excellent. I look forward to reading that when you get that one going, for sure here. And I do want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight, and please stay tuned for Dr. J Radio Live coming up next year on the Dark Matter Digital Network. And I know we're going to probably run out of time in the illusion of time, but I want to ask you very quickly about the Sphinx in general. Obviously, the face was changed, and it was more feminine. Is that correct, like Sekhmet?
Originally, it appears to have been, at least from the sources that I depend upon, it appears to have originally been a lion.
Okay.
And then the head was carved. Obviously, I mean, if you visit the Sphinx, you'll see obviously the head was carved later because the body is more eroded than the face is, and the body has been buried in sand for thousands of years. So clearly, the dynastic Egyptians decided to carve the face of somebody, probably someone's mom or dad, onto the Sphinx. But according to the geologic evidence of Dr. Robert Schoch and others, the erosion of the Sphinx itself is at least 10,000 years old, making it at least 4,000 years older than the dynastic Egyptians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty fascinating right there. And we're just about out of time here. Once again, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody enjoyed the show. And I think we're just about out. Yep, we are. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Art Bell. Have a great week, everybody.